My screen?
Yes, sir.
Right. So I've been told by Konark to speak on the role of startups in technological innovation and security. And, as always, he's put me in a tight spot because when I asked him what should I speak about, uh, should I talk to startups? Should I talk about startups? What I speak on this topic would depend largely on what the audience is. And he told me it's a mixed audience where there are people from the startups also, and it obviously does not make sense to talk to startups about startups. So what I will do is I will give you a mix and match. I would have something about the NIIO, how it was set up, and the Sprint initiative. I will cover that very briefly. I will cover some of the policy changes which the startups might be keen on knowing, and in case there are any questions, I will take them on later. And of course, the topic per se, which is what role the startups can play. So if I see the topic, there are three distinct things in this. One is the role of startups in technological innovation. And of course, when you say how they can contribute to security, so then the defense startup and the organizational structure which is there to nurture innovation is also something which will come in. So I will cover all three of them very briefly. And I will be focusing more on the naval side because that is the one which I'm, of course, more familiar with. But I'm sure there's similar structures in the Army and the Air Force also. And if you ask, if somebody wants to know in the question answer time, I'll cover that also. So if I was to sum up all that I have to say about the role of startup in wars, I can sum it up in one slide because I'm sure you'll all agree that disruptive innovation is what wins wars. And if disruptive innovation wins wars, this disruptive innovation comes, the out of the box ideas comes from small organizations. Very rarely will you find a big, large organization because the larger an organization gets, the more bureaucratic it gets. And you might have heard that word, a self-licking ice cream cone. A self-licking ice cream cone is an organization whose primary task becomes sustaining itself. So that does happen as the organization becomes bigger and bigger. It is always the small agile teams which come up with disruptive ideas. So therefore, startups have a huge role to play. When you talk about so I'm giving here the Henderson Clark's typology for defense for innovation, but it's been modified for defense innovation. The references are all given down below. If you see any new idea, it'll either reinforce or overturn the core concepts. And there would be linkages between the core concepts. When you say core concepts, that is the fundamental way we have been doing things. And the components of the core concepts, they can remain unchanged or changed. So these are the four. So if you see the four things which you get out of this, your innovation can be incremental, modular, architectural, or radical. So let me give you an example of this. I will take. Let me take underwater warfare. But you can take example of even for example, a floppy disk in the computer got changed, and it gave way to the CDs, which gave way then to pen drives and so on. So that is also modular. One thing goes and the other thing comes in. But so let's talk about sonars, for example. So if a firm or if a product which is being offered is something which has a better figure of merit, it has better digital signal processing, which means it improves the performance of the sonar. That is incremental innovation. And incremental innovation is something which is one, easy to do, and two, it will have no resistance because the user is also used to it. It is something which is the basic thing has remained unchanged. The modular innovation, to give you an example of this, so for example, if you are using a magnetic anomaly to detect a submarine, again taking the example of the underwater world, then instead of using, if you start using a nitrogen vacancy diamond, I'm just giving an example, which is a very, very sensitive sensor which can detect the magnetic anomalies. So the basic concept remains the same, but instead of using one method of doing it, you're doing another method. And the example which I gave again, you can go back to the computer thing, architectural and so on. But the point which I want to make here is about radical innovation. Radical innovation is something which fundamentally transforms. So if you talk about the business world, if you have something which is totally disruptive, whom is it disrupting? It's disrupting, the entire ecosystem. It makes for the competition, it will drive them out of the business. As technology is evolving, and as you have, the way of doing warfare changing, so this radical innovation, there are 2-3 points about it. One, there would be resistance to it. So this is something as users, as people who are in the armed forces, as war fighters, as well as the startups, you have to realize that there would always be resistance to radical innovation. Anything which fundamentally transforms the way the things are done. The common question, which I have been facing while I was in the Navy, whenever there's a new disruptive thing, people ask, how does it fit into my concept of operations? And the answer is to always give is that it doesn't and it can't. Again, to give you an example, and I keep giving this example very often, when the machine gun was invented, people did not ask, how do you fit this machine gun on top of a horse? It made the horse cavalry redundant. So, the way the drones now, the FPV drones, small, inexpensive, large number drones, the way they're impacting warfare, it will have an effect on, it can't be business as usual. So radical innovation is the thing which wins wars, and this radical innovation generally comes from the startups, which are smaller, more agile, and a startup with a big idea can make a difference. I will not go into the details of this, but I just want to state here that, whether you talk about the research through design or you talk about any kind of, design thinking, the 5 steps which will be there. So this again, this is as per the Zimmerman, this thing of 2010. It is basically you have to understand the requirements. So this is from the startup's perspective, or even if you're an in-house innovator in any of the forces, you have to understand the requirements, then define the problem, think of the possible solutions, prototype and test. I mean, this is something which seems obvious, but if you see the same thing, this will be the same way you would solve any problem. So if you relate it to the 5-stage design thinking model, you will see that it is more or less the same. So when you say understand the requirements, or you say empathize with the user to understand what the problems are, so the process remains the same. Then you have to define what the thing is, ideate about it, prototype and test. But the point which I would want to emphasize here is that this 5-step process, empathize, define, ideate, prototype and test, in any innovation is not a linear process. Unfortunately, the systems which we have, not only in the armed forces, but even in any innovation anywhere, we tend to, if any government grant is being given for defining something, initially you would have a QR or you would have an idea about what you want to create. Now that leads to a problem. So so let's start with you start with empathize, right? Then that will help you define the problem. Fair enough till now. But when I said it's not a linear process, when you make the prototype, you will learn from the prototype, and that itself will spark new ideas. When you test, the test will create new ideas. And when you do the test, you will learn about or generate fresh user requirements through testing. When you start testing a product, you say, why this? Why not this? Tests may reveal insights that redefine the problem. During testing, you might realize that, maybe the problem which I had identified was not complete or needs to be modified. Now, if you see this involves a lot of back and forth. So it is not that, you have one simple linear line and you'll go along that, which becomes a problem, especially if your mindset is the procurement mindset, and in which, you have a QR, and then you see whether it meets the QRs, and then you test it against those QRs. Now, this kind of a thing cannot happen in innovation. Because as I've just said, that while testing itself, you might get new ideas, you may redefine your problem, uh, you can learn about user requirements while testing. So the point here which I want to emphasize is that the users have to work with the developers. It cannot be that both cannot work in isolation. The developers have to understand the user perspective, but equally the users have to understand the developer perspective, which is very, very critical if you want to nurture innovation. The second thing which I want to put here is that when you say user, who exactly is a user? User could be, as far as startup is concerned, any, if you're interacting with the Navy, for example, you'll say any naval officer is a user. Is any naval officer is a user, or would you say that the particular directorate who is taking on the case, they are the users, or is it the user who's, finally the man who will be sitting on the system which you make, the radar, is he the user? Because you will also find that sometimes the perspectives between them could be different. And this is again something which is a part of the process, how things happen. The naval headquarters, when they define a problem that they want it like this, when it finally goes to the field, from the field there would be other ideas about how it can be used and alternate ways of maybe the GUI or anything. So this is an issue, and unless the startup, this is a US naval term which I found very interesting, which said dump technology on the users and run. So the developers do often do that. They come up with technology which looks good, it looks very nice on paper, but finally when it goes to the user, when I say the user here, I'm talking about the end user in the field, who's the man who's finally going to use that product. The user may not really be happy with it. To avoid that, this whole process has to be seen as a cyclic process, and it cannot be a linear process, as I had mentioned earlier. Let me make some key points upfront, and then I will go into the details of each. I have been saying this again. This is something which I'm very fond of saying, and people have been accusing me of getting repetitive. But I do firmly believe in this. India transitioned from the agricultural age to the information age without spending sufficient time in the industrial age. So what that means is that our industrial ecosystem never developed or never got time to develop the way it should have. So if you say that, for example, a jet engine or a gas turbine, everybody knows how a jet engine works. The theory behind how a jet engine works is well known. But we still probably cannot make it because the metallurgy which is required is not as well established because of the industrial age ecosystem not getting sufficient time to mature. Therefore, our strength has been in software and not in manufacturing. Now, this is something again which is good news and bad news, both for the startups and for the users. Now, for the users, the good news is that as the world is shifting to the information age, as we are transiting to the algorithmic warfare, the difference between us and the leading nation in the world has suddenly narrowed. That's an advantage for us. As far as the startups go, as I said, a small startup with a big idea can make a difference. Earlier, when you said that if you had to make something, you need to have a mega complex, you need to have in the industrial age I'm talking about, you would need to have a factory. That need not necessarily be the case in the information age, and it is not only about software related things. Even otherwise, you can generate the IP, and manufacturing can always be done by somebody else. Next point again, equally important for the users as well as for the startups is about risk taking. Risk taking is essential. You have to be prepared to fail. In fact, you'll succeed only if you're prepared to fail. And a well-proven technology is really cutting edge. So the users also have to realize that if you go for something which is cutting edge, which is disruptive, you will normally find that it is something which is just about developing. The aim, as far as the services are concerned, or as far as any user is concerned, is to field usable products. Academic pursuit and technology demonstrators are important, but are not the aim. However, it should also be emphasized that without having the academic rigor, backing or the fundamental research backing the technology which will be used in making a product, you may not get a product. So there has to be a fine balance which has to be drawn between these two. Next, something which is obvious, we can't always keep playing catch up. We need to aim ahead of the target if we want to hit the bullseye on a moving target. Some of you might have read that the US Air Force, for example, I'm just taking another example here, they've stopped all funding. I was reading an article which said they're stopping all funding into R&D for helicopters. There's a technology which matures after a certain time. So if you say that small drones will be the next big thing, or eVTOLs will be the next big thing, then that is where you start doing your R&D. I am not saying that making artillery guns, for example, is not important. Of course, it is important, but that is something which people have been doing since the Second World War. Of course, with time they've improved. But what happens is that if you keep trying to create what was created by others a few decades back, you'll always be playing catch up. So it may be better to go for identify and go for the next big thing so that you become the leader in that. Technological advancements and innovation, even if out of personal brilliance, rarely succeed without organizational support. And the Navy, I think, realized this when they set up the NIIO, the Naval Innovation and Indigenization Organization, which I'll be covering a bit more in detail after I finish with these points. These are the points which I want to keep in mind when I'm discussing other things. So you need institutional support, you need organizational support, you need somebody to handhold not only the startups, but also to handhold the users, because as I said, the disruptive innovation will have some resistance. So to explain why it is important and to see how it fits into the ConOps, the new thing which is there, requires some kind of an organizational structure. Resources are not limitless, and when I say resources, it is not only about money. It's money, time, energy, effort, manpower, everything. Therefore, prioritization becomes the key. There are a number of times when the startups, when I speak to them, they are quite cut up, because every startup does feel that my idea is the best, and that is the way it must be. They cannot succeed unless they are convinced about the utility of their ideas. But what you have to understand is that even if it's not only about the money and the orders which will be coming, there would be time, effort, and energy which would have to be expended by, say, NIIO or TDAC to interact with the startup, see what the product is, and to see how it can be developed. So in case you have a number of startups, then it becomes important to prioritize. So that is something which you have to keep in mind. COTS technology, of course, is important in a fast-changing scenario. The days when the services or the defense forces used to lead technology development in the civil world used to follow, I think, are over. Even now, some of the critical technology, of course, is being developed for defense purposes, but small startups are coming up with COTS technology. So these, which are there in the civil sector, can be adopted or adapted for military use. And this is important because technology can become obsolete in the time it may take to induct a mill-grade system. So if you take a COTS system, adopt it, adapt it, induct it, then it may, one, compress your timelines, and two, it will always give you cutting-edge technology rather than technology which is obsolete. Because if you go by the conventional way of development, procurement, induction, that entire cycle takes time, certification. So this entire cycle takes time, and it would lead you to always, again, playing catch up. So it's much better to feel the system, prove it, and then improve it. With that, I will come. I will not go into the details. Those who are interested can ask me in the question and answers. Otherwise, there's enough information available about this on the internet also. But the Naval Innovation and Indigenization Organization, or the NIIO, was set up on the 13th of August 2020, if I remember the date correctly. And This is a structure which brought together the twin components of innovation and indigenization. So Navy was already at the forefront of indigenization. The new component which was added was innovation. And to do this, some new things were created. First of all, there was a apex body called NTAC, or the Naval Technology Acceleration Council. This is a body which meets once every 6 months. It is chaired by the Vice Chief of Naval Staff. It has nominated as well as ex officio members. You have people from the industry also who are invited. You also have people of tech eminence who are invited to be members. And in addition to that, officers, regardless of rank, who have demonstrated out of the box thinking are also members of INTAC. Under this, you have the NIIO working group, or the Naval Innovation and Indigenization Organization working group, which is co-chaired by two APSOs, the ACOM Modernization, Assistant Chief of Material Modernization, under whom the Indigenization Directorate works, and the ACNS SR, Assistant Chief of Naval Staff, Staff Requirements, under whom TDAC, which is the Technology Development Acceleration Cell, which I'll be covering subsequently, they work. So these are the two-star officers who respectively deal with innovation and indigenization. Both of them co-chair this, and a number of members are there. This meets every 2 months or more often if required. Now, there were a number of organizations and directorates which were already there in the Navy, which used to deal with innovation and indigenization. For example, the Directorate of Indigenization, the Directorate of Armament Production and Indigenization, and so on. VESI, which has been doing some fantastic work. The Warship Design Bureau. So the thing which was created de novo was TDAC, or the Technology Development Acceleration Cell. You'll notice here that NTAC and TDAC, both of them have the word acceleration in it. So the TDAC is not Technology Development Cell, it is the Technology Development Acceleration Cell. So this word was put after a lot of deliberation. One, it shows, of course, it's about technology acceleration. It's about leapfrogging and pole vaulting, but also it implies that it is, it is not only about technology development. It is also equally about policies, policy changes, and other things. In addition to this, so TDAC is a very, very small group, as some of you might be aware. There is something known as VISTAR, which is the extended form of TDAC. These are officers in the Navy who have demonstrated ability for out-of-the-box thinking. They have been given permission to directly communicate with NHQ, or the Naval Headquarters, on matters of innovation. So this, it compresses the timelines, and it makes it a flat, hierarchy-less structure. In addition, we've started something known as INSTEP, which is the Indian Naval Students Technical Engagement Program. We have MOUs with a number of eminent universities, and through this, we offer a online internship to the students. But this is a method for which the students can interact with the Navy, and which is mutually beneficial. The students gain because they get to understand the naval problems, and the Navy also gains because if you keep interacting with the young minds, you learn a lot of things yourself. So TDAC, people have been saying this. In fact, I saw somebody tweeting this also, saying that this is before Swavalamban, that it is more like a startup than a conventional service organization, which may be true to a certain extent, in the sense that the TDAC was given a lot of admin leeway to give them freedom to work, because they have to be small, agile, and nimble, fast, quick decision making. So that is how it was designed. As I said, it's just about 4 officers plus 21 volunteers. That is the Vistar, which I had spoken about, the extended arm of TDAC. These numbers might have changed. I'm talking about, just 2-3 months back while I was there. The numbers may have gone up. It might not be 21 now. It might be 24. But basically, this is the officers in the field who also, in addition to their normal duties, they help out with innovation. As was mentioned in the introduction also, over 50 patents have been filed by naval officers since the NIIO was launched. You would be aware that Mission Raksha Gyan Shakti was launched by the Ministry of Defense. In fact, the Honorable Raksha Mantri had launched it in November 2018. which gave emphasis on creating a IPR culture and about monetization of knowledge. So that is something which initially was limited to the DPSUs. Thereafter, of course, the services were also involved. And once again, I think the Navy was first off the block, and we created the NIIO to support this. And as I mentioned, 50 plus patents have been filed, out of which I think about 12 have already been transferred to the industry for manufacturing. Over 150 products are being developed and are in various stages. This is through various schemes, including the TDF, the IDEX, and also in-house, innovations. And we have more than 40 plus partners. The question which people generally keep asking is that how can NIIO, which is such a small organization, the TDAC just having 4 officers, how can it produce the kind of results it's producing, or give the kind of numbers which I've just flashed in this slide? It happens because of all the partners which TDAC works with, which could be academic institutions, which could be incubators, which could be industry bodies. So these 40 plus partners are the ones who contribute to the kind of results which have been shown. Some major changes, IPR policy I had already mentioned about. I mentioned that more and more the Navy is open to academic collaboration, including having serving naval officers becoming visiting professors in universities, because as I mentioned, it's a win-win. The more the users interact with the academia, the students get to learn, the professors get to learn, they get to learn about the specific user requirements, and the users themselves get to learn quite a bit by being in a, through this interaction. In addition, industry interaction, this is done through the SIDM. This is normally done on the last Friday of every month. You may wonder why the last Friday. It's just something which we at that time had decided when we were having a discussion with SIDM on this, that if you have a long-term calendar, that means you 1 year in advance, you say that every last Friday, so people mark it in the calendars that, last Friday I have to keep afternoon, I have to keep myself free for interacting with the the startups know that if they have to interact with the Navy, last Friday is a opportune day. And a long-term calendar is given so that every Friday we have a different topic. In one day it could be radars and communication systems, another day it could be engines and diesel generators, the third day it could be aviation, and so on. In addition, something which is known as Industry Yatra was started, where we reach out and again with industry bodies, we go to the states, various places where the industry body there will have all the startups and all the people assembled at one place so that we can have one-on-one interaction. Normally, we try and do that one day. I'm saying we every time because out of habit, I'm talking about what the NIIO does. So what NIIO does is that they go there. One day they normally would have an interaction, say an auditorium or something with the industry body, and before coming back, whatever seems promising, visit them and see how it can be used, how it can be adopted or adapted for naval use. The term innovation industry partners is something which is used now instead of calling them vendors, because this is something, the term vendors we don't use anymore, for the simple reason that when you say innovation industry partners, it is not just about semantics, it's not just about words are powerful. This implies that we acknowledge that we have to work together with the industry if we want the kind of things which we need. And NIIO was all about creating an ecosystem of innovation. A number of policy changes have been made by the MOD, and some have been initiated by NIIO. Some internal Navy policies have been changed by NIIO. There's one line which I'd like to quote here. This is from the first Swavalamban, which is the NIIO seminar, which happened 2 years back. On the stage, one of the speakers had said from the MOD, one of the speakers in response to a startup's question, he had said, in fact, Mr. Bajpai, who's now the ASDP, He had said it. He said that there is intent and there is policy. Intent is clear, Atmanirbhar Bharat. The policy is flexible. So if you want some changes in policy, he said, let us know and we will change the policies. And I think they've lived up to their word. So you might have seen. What has changed? I would say everything has changed. What I'm showing now is the screenshot of the amended DAP Chapter 3, which is available on the net. So what you see, what is in black was the original DAP, which is the Defense Acquisition Procedures, and the one in blue are the amendments. So as you can see, more or less anything and everything which is there has been changed. I will be covering this slightly more in detail because this is something which, again, the startups as well as the users need to be aware of. But the one which I'm showing the screenshot as of now is are the amendments which came in April 2022. And this is the one which enabled the Navy to move quickly and move for the Sprint initiative, which also I shall cover. But a number of amendments have come out subsequently also. In fact, some just a few months back about the spiral development. Now, these amendments are very, very powerful. These amendments are very, very powerful. If you're a startup, you need to understand this. Just about 3-4 pages. Read them, understand the implications of that. If you're a user, it is equally powerful because this permits you to significantly compress the timelines. Whenever you discuss anything, whenever you talk about startups, the startups always worry about the value of death, after the product has been made and before the orders come. These amendments and what NIIO has been trying to do is create a bridge over this valley of death. First, a major thing in this amendment, I'm talking about now the April 22 amendments. Quantity vetting and scaling has been dispensed with for initial procurement up to delegated financial powers. Delegated financial powers, as you would be aware, for the vice chief of the respective services up to 300 crores, which is quite substantial. Most of the startups, the products which can be bought in that. Why was this required about quantity vetting and scaling to be done away with? Simply because something which is new, obviously, justification of why you need these many is difficult. You can initially place orders in limited numbers, experiment with it, and then also understand how it needs to be changed. We go back to what I'd shown you earlier, that it not being a linear process. And then, the subsequent orders can also be placed. This is for the initial procurement. Single-stage composite trials by the project facilitation team nominated by the service headquarters will be done. So it will not be that, trials will keep going on and on and on endlessly. You're supposed to have single-stage composite trials. The trial report is to be ratified within 1 week and accepted by the service headquarters within 3 weeks. So if you see, everything is time-bound, and I will come to the the speed at which some of the projects have been implemented. If something is innovative, you will find that there will be not many people making it. You can have quite a few situations where you will run into a resultant single vendor. I'm using the word vendor here because it's I'm quoting from the DAP. So don't say that I said that we don't use the term vendor anymore. Official word is vendor. So resultant single vendor is permitted if only one firm clears the trials. PDS and PRU, which is the definition statement and the realizable units for the IDEX schemes, these are articulated by the services. These are converted to PSQRs prior to the trials, and if found acceptable, the trials are taken against these PSQRs, and if the trials are cleared, they'll be converted to the SQRs through the automatic route. Now, this again is a big change because if you make a very, very rigid QRs, there would be a problem in innovation. Let me again give an example here, and I keep giving this example. So let's assume that a startup tells me that they can make a drone which can fly for 8 days. And accordingly, then I make the PSQRs or QRs as per the procedure which was hitherto there. Now, let's assume that the best available drone which is there in that category in the world is 1 day endurance. And the startup is claiming that he can make a drone for 8 days endurance. Now, if I make my QRs for 8 days, and if you find that it flies for 7 days, what am I supposed to do? Say that it does not meet the requirements, which is, you would agree, ridiculous. it is still 7 times or 8 times better than what is the best available. So that is the advantage of the PDS PRU. They can be changed in. It's something which evolves, and so this the DOI, which is the DIO, which is a Defense Innovation Organization, which runs the IDEX. They team, the partner incubator, the startup, the users, all of them work together, and so this process gives a lot of leeway, which is more suited for innovation than the thing which was hitherto in vogue, which was more suited for procurement. The RFI-based process has been dispensed with for IDEX cases, and statement of case is to be prepared within 4 weeks for accord of AON, which is acceptance of necessity. The requirement of consultation with other agencies has been done away with. Otherwise, what used to happen is that if something is ready, then you give it for consultation to, say, DRDO and Army and Air Force and other agencies. So this has been done away with. If it's a naval system and the Navy wants it, the Navy can go ahead and procure it. Of course, the AON according authority continues being HQIDS, CISC. So other agencies do get to know about it, but the formal process which used to be there of earlier of consultation, where you send the details to everybody and everybody gives their comments, that is no longer required for IDEX cases. All these things which I mentioned, as well as other things, I've been trying to put out on Twitter, now called X. And I put it as my pinned tweet because I've been told by a lot of startups that they don't. So I was telling them that you should have seen these amendments in the DAP. They said that these things are that if you know where to find it, you'll be able to find it. So I don't think that is the case. However, all these things, what I've done is I put them out as threads. I've not been very regular lately since my retirement, actually. But I used to put them out as threads and then put a thread of threads so that if you just go through it, each post will tell you which thread to go to. Right. I come next to Sprint, which is supporting pole vaulting and R&D through IDEX, NIIO, and TDAC. More than an acronym, it was a backronym. First, we thought of the word sprint, which symbolizes the speed or the acceleration, and then we found words to fit into it. It was a statement of intent of the Indian Navy that we will develop at least 75 technologies or products with the industry. Tri-party, so it's a collaborative project between the DIO, which runs IDEX of the MOD, and the NIIO, and MOU was signed for this. Genesis of Sprint was a statement which was made that if you want different results, you have to do things differently. It was started with a willingness to fail. As I mentioned, it was a collaborative approach. The MOU was there. And in fact, people ask that if, as it is, the IDEX or the DIO is supposed to work with the services, then why was this MOU required in the first place? So I think it was important because, one, it committed everybody to timelines, and two, it reiterated what everybody is supposed to do. And it was so the Sprint initiative was launched in the Swavalambhan seminar by the Honorable Prime Minister 2 years back. And thereafter, it sprinted, if I can say so. So this is a post which was put out by the DIO. TDAC shut down their office, shifted to IIT Delhi, and in 10 days, a number of presentations were done. And in addition to this, the open challenge proposals were also examined. So they were close to about 1,200 proposals which were examined in these 10 days. Which means that more or less all the startups which were in the defense field did, give some kind of a proposal. So these were hectic days, but it was finished, and it was quite satisfying because Mr. Sanjay Jaju, who was a then ASDP, who actually, when we were launching Sprint, he had said that it's he supported it fully, of course, but he had said that it is over ambitious, probably. So it was quite nice to see that within 10 days of it being launched, he tweeted saying it's magical and it was a real sprint. And this was, of course, due to the teamwork between the Navy, the IDEX team in DIO, as well as the startups. The startups actually surprised us in some of the cases with the kind of things which they came up with. and this magic continued. The first contract, the development contract, that is for making the product, was signed in just 20 days of the announcement of the winners. And this product itself was made and undertook trials and was inducted, I think, 4 or 5 months ahead of timelines, which in any case were themselves very tight because it was 1 year. But this is something which could be achieved. You must have seen this. This was going quite viral over the social media. I'm just giving this as an example. This is a fabric which can take from. So in the first photo, you can see him pouring molten metal over himself. This is the CEO of Vida. The second one, he's putting liquid nitrogen, so it can take from minus 200 to plus 2000 degrees centigrade. Now, why I'm giving this as an example is that the point I want to make here is that one technology can lead to multiple products. So this one can be used for firefighting suits. It can be used for hot and cold lagging. It can be used for camouflage because basically this is carbon nanotubes, aerogel based on carbon nanotubes, so which is a very good insulator of heat, right? So if it insulates heat, it would work as a invisibility cloak, if I may call it that, for IR cameras. So this is something which in the second edition of Swavalaban became a big hit with the media. All the English channels were calling it Harry Potter's invisibility cloak, and all the Hindi ones were calling it Mr. India. But so the weapon covers, because this is nanoporous and hydrophobic, so the water cannot go in, but the water vapor or the moisture from inside can escape. But the last point is critical here, that it will also have a lot of civilian applications. I mentioned earlier that it is important to adopt or adapt the COTS technology for military use. If you're a startup which is getting into the military domain, it may not be possible in all cases, but as far as possible, I advise the startups that also see that what are the other applications which you can have, not only civil applications. CAPFs, for example, would be able to, with modifications in some cases, be able to use quite a few of, so something, a firefighting suit would be, for example, equally useful for the firefighters in the state fire services and so on. But one technology can give you multiple products, and initially itself, you should, so putting all your eggs in one basket, try and diversify as much as you can. Another example I'm giving here is of massive MIMO beamforming ASIC. I will not go into the details of the massive MIMO. MIMO, of course, is multiple in, multiple out technology and what are the advantages. But this can be used again. It can be used for ISA radars. It can be used for space communications. It can be used for making proximity fuses for shells. And it will have a number of civilian applications in the telecommunication as well as space communication and various fields. The picture which I show down below, I'm very fond of this, though I just interacted with this startup. They're Pune based, so I was interacting with them, and I've seen how polished and how sophisticated looking this array has now become. But this one I'm very fond of because this is so. It's very exciting to see something which was just at an idea stage, and in a few months transition to this, and in a few more months has transitioned to what it is now, and of course in a few more months it will become a radar. But the point here is focus on civilian applications, and for the same technology focus on multiple uses. Don't put all the eggs in one basket if you're a startup. You might have seen this post which was put out by HQIDS on 18th of September last year. They called it landmark approval because it's the first time I think approval of so many cases was given together. 10 IDEX cases amounting to 1220 crore the AON was given. You can see the drones, unmanned systems, autonomous systems, underwater drones, and various kinds of systems were included in this. But the point here is this, that I think I'm not sure about the exact figures currently, so I will not give a figure because I might not be current. But somewhere about 80% to 90% of all successful IDEX cases resulted from this 1 year of sprint, which I think is very, very satisfying. So lessons learned, one is translators are needed. The users speak English, the innovators speak geek. You need somebody who can understand a bit of the user thing and also understand a bit of geek and translate in between. And I would say the converse is also true and equally true. Sometimes when a startup makes a presentation, they become so technical that they may lose the interest of the user. And I would recommend, if you're a startup and who's getting into defense, it is good if you have somebody in your team. It need not be a full-time this thing. It could be, and quite a few people would be happy to help you. Take some retired officer, ask him for his advice because he understands the user requirements, which you may not. The user may not understand your technology, but so it comes back to the same thing. The technology and the user requirements have to be married to each other, which means you have to work together. So domain knowledge is very, very important. And since the two are not speaking the same language, a translator in between would be useful. I've already mentioned partners, not vendors. So if you are a user, you need to listen to them. And, startups who have put everything at stake, whose entire life is devoted to a particular technology, which could be, say, swarming, or it could be AI or whatever, probably has a better understanding of technology than any user would. A QR-based approach, as I mentioned, will not work where the users give their requirements and then the startups either match up or don't match up. It is much better if the user and the startups work together because of the reason which I mentioned. The startup may understand technology, but they do not understand the user requirements, and vice versa. Next, this is something which, again, both the users and the startups have to be aware and have to acknowledge and have to be mindful of, that resistance to innovation is real. And it is not about India or Indian Armed Forces. Globally, even in the private business, in the business where the bottom line is the money, then there should be no reason for anybody to resist innovation. But there are a number of studies and there are a number of cases which I can highlight. Innovation is always resisted, at least initially, till the time the results are shown. I would recommend for the startups and for the users, again, have some plan in place for systemic mitigation of risk. So, for example, I started off by saying, we set up this organization with a willingness to fail. But 3 years or 4 years down the line, when somebody says, what did you achieve? You can hardly say that, no, we were set up with a willingness to fail, so we failed. So let me give an example here from one, from the user perspective, two, from the startup perspective. So from the user perspective, if you see the 30 mm fuse, we are, two firms are doing it. One is a laser-based approach. Second is the more conventional RF-based approach. That is something which one would be a global first. The second one is available, not available in India. So you're aiming high, but you also have a backup plan in case, the first one doesn't succeed. Similarly, from the startup's perspective also, it's good to aim high, but always have a backup, if I can call it that. And this links to my second point, which is that, that there is no failure. A change in mindset is required. So again, let me give an example here. Let me give you from the sprint challenges only. When we spoke about blue-green lasers, as you're aware, the RF waves do not penetrate water, and sound is used in sonars, but that has challenges of its own. So blue-green lasers are the ones which can penetrate to some extent. So when this problem statement was given out, there were lots of discussions, and then a conscious decision was taken. Now, suppose you get 500 meters, you can use it to detect submarines. Suppose you don't get 500 meters, you get only 100 meters. You can still use it to detect mines, say in shallow waters. Suppose you don't get 100 meters also, you get only 5 meters. You would still be able to use it for bathymetry, for measuring depths in very, very shallow waters where boats with echo sounders cannot go. So there is no failure, but you need to have a plan that this is plan A, this is plan B, this is plan C, and if this doesn't work till there, I can still use it for something else. Support is not only financial. I will not go into the details of MOQ. I think MOQ and MVP is something which We had started with the Sprint, but it is now it's going to say the minimum pilot order quantity. It's the new amendments which have come out. Now it's across the board for all IDEX products. But more, so what I keep telling startups is some startups get caught in this vicious cycle of, grants. It's good. IDEX gives you grants up to 1.5 CR. In case of prime cases, it gives up to 10 CR with matching contribution, of course. In Aditi, they give up to 25 CR. In TDF, it can go up to 50 CR, which is nice. But eventually look at the procurement which will happen rather than, that should be your aim. And also, as I said, diversify and make it useful for other sectors as well. But the thing is that even if the grant, so for example, if you're matching contribution, so there may be a project, and there are quite a few projects like this where lots of startups say that how do you expect to develop this in 1.5 CR? It may not happen in 1.5 CR. The grant is up to 1.5 CR. So if the product development cost, for example, is 10 crores, the government will fund 1.5 crores under open challenge or the DISC challenge. That is the upper limit of the grant. But if you go through that route, you are getting support much more than just the grant. You are getting a nodal officer who will guide you, who will handhold you. You're getting a partner incubator whose the facilities you can use and whose advice you can take. You're getting a accelerated procurement procedure. So all these things also matter. So the startups need to realize that support is not only financial. The users also equally have to realize that support is not only financial, and they can support the startups in multiple ways rather than just looking at the. I believe, and I may be wrong, and lots of startups do tell me that I am wrong, but I do believe that money is not a constraint for a good idea. If you have a good idea, it is not the government's job to. I know this is going to be controversial, but it is not the government's job, or it is not the any organization's job to take risks, right? I'm talking about the financial risk with the funding loon shot. But it is the VCs who do that, and they fund it in the hope that if it succeeds, and they are aware that 80% of the times it will fail, which is the nature of the beast. But if it succeeds, it will more than cover up their losses. So if I keep saying this, if you have a good idea, if you have a firm plan about how it is going to be developed, if you already have the support in terms of, you are being declared a TDF or an IDEX winner, you will find that VCs would be keen on investing in you. I have finished. I'm just leaving it with 3 quotes, food for thought, so to speak. And after that, I'll be open to any questions.
Very, very comprehensive, very interesting and practice-oriented presentation. I think this is something which was interesting for everyone. So before I open up for the questions, because you were so much focused on Navy, understandably that is. So I wanted to know if this innovation and acceleration is same for the Indian Army as well.
So yes, the IDEX which I mentioned. Let me start my camera. So the IDEX thing which I mentioned, the TDF thing which I mentioned, all these are common. They're common across the 3 services. It's not even the Coast Guard, even the DPSUs. The organizational structure which I mentioned is unique to the Navy, the NIIO. But the equivalent in the Army is the ADB, the Army Design Bureau. Why I am saying equivalent, I don't think it is exactly the same, because the NIIO, when it was set up, it had a slightly different charter than, our Directorate of Indigenization already existed, and it was doing some great work. But when we set up NIIO, we clearly made a distinction between innovation and indigenization. So what ADB does is, but they are the nodal agency for all IDEX cases, and they are the ones who deal with all innovation and indigenization cases in the Army. In the Air Force, also you have a Directorate of Indigenization. In addition, you also they've recently started something new which is called the Directorate of Aeronautical Design. In fact, if you are on Twitter or X, as it's now called, you could try following them. There, I think it's Vayu Saksham. If you search for them, so that's where the Air Force interacts with the startups. They also, so every organization has their own structure. What I covered was for the Navy. Slight differences, but all three of them work closely with each other. I can assure you that.
Queries, but before that, I would like to just announce that if anyone has a question, you can either drop it in a chat box or you can raise your hand, and then you'll have access to the speaker. Okay, we have one question. Kritika, can I put you in a panelist and then speak rather? Yes, Kritika, can you please ask your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. My question to sir is, when the innovation idea is conceived and by the time it is, ready for the users to be used, what is the average time that, it takes from becoming an idea to becoming a full final product? And is there any way that this time can be reduced? Because many a times we see that there are brilliant ideas, there are brilliant prototypes that are being developed, but those are not all of them are not actually delivered on the ground for the users.
Okay, so if I can answer that, Kritika, one, it will be almost impossible if, I mean, very difficult, if not impossible for me to answer that what is the average time, because, there is no such thing as an average time, because it will depend on the complexity of the product. So let's take Sprint, for example. As I mentioned to you, the first development contract was signed in 20 days. Within 4 months, the product was undergoing trials on board the ship, and a few months after that, the contract had been signed for delivery. And the systems were deployed; they already deployed operationally on ships. So it can be a few months. But for a bigger system, it may be 2 years, 3 years only to develop the system. So saying what is the average time would be difficult to answer. Is there any way this can be reduced? Yes, of course, it needs to be reduced, and that is what the whole. That's why I mentioned, so all efforts are being taken by the Navy and other forces also to accelerate it. I mentioned specifically that the realization that in this era of fast-changing technology, we need to hasten our processes is there, which is why we had that technology development acceleration cell, the Naval Technology Acceleration Council. I have already covered the policy changes which have made it possible to reduce the time for induction once the trial has been satisfactorily taken. As I said, in a few months it can be inducted. Your second question, which I can see written there in the chat, is about the education and industry requirements are not aligned, especially engineering courses and jobs in emerging technologies. How can we make the students? So, I'm also associated with the school. I'm director of academics there. So I keep interacting with the students. And especially in small towns, if you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And everybody's standard answer is engineer, doctor, engineer, doctor. So the fact that I'm sure you'll agree that there is a surplus of engineers as of now, and that also instead of being in all fields, quite a few of them want to get into coding. Not all. So this is something which is issue. Skill development is important. The new education policy has emphasized quite a bit on this, but I think it will take time for it to start showing results. The changes which are being made as a part of the new education policy, by the time the students who are now in school come to college, I think that's the amount of time it will take for the results to be fully realized. But some very, very progressive steps have been made. Does that answer your question, Kritika?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kritika. Mr. Vinit Yadav.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am,
you.
for giving me a chance. Good afternoon, sir, and good afternoon to all the friends. Sir, myself Vineet, and I am currently pursuing my degree in engineering. So I want to know, sir, as we see the advancement of artificial intelligence in war, as we see the conflict between Israel and the new emerging technologies which are affecting the defense sector very well. So as we see, there are different types of attacks India is seeing, like Kashmir. So we need to more advancements like artificial intelligence to counter these types of attacks and these types of adversaries. So, sir, what are the current trends and what are the basic required in current time India, like using artificial intelligence so we can stop these type of attacks, and how can we work together, you and these type of industries as a volunteer or as internship students?
Okay, so there are two parts of the question. One is you mentioned about the changing technology. Yes, of course, the technology is changing. The ongoing conflicts in various parts have shown that. So even if you see, all the details of all these statements which I mentioned, they are available on the IDEX website, including who are the winners and which is the firm which is developing it. So if you see, there are a lot of unmanned systems of various kinds in all dimensions. That means aerial, surface, on the water, that is, and subsurface, swarming, autonomous boat swarms, underwater swarms for mine hunting. So all these systems are there, which are so that they're being developed, and some of them have already been developed and tested, and some of them are being inducted now. Various stages of, as I said, it's difficult to give about, every project takes a different amount of time. So that is something which is already happening. The second question which you asked is that how, as a student, can you engage with this? One, aren't you already doing it? As a student, you're engaging with this, but one, by reading, I've given you the IDEX website is one thing which you could follow, or the season portal. It will give you a lot of ideas. You can always contact, if your college is a partner with the NIIO, or with any of the industry bodies, or with any of the other services. That gives you an opportunity for internship. IDEX itself has IDEX interns who then work on specific problem statements. So you can apply, details again are there on the IDEX website. You apply for internship there, and if selected, then it happens in various ways. So if you're selected, then you can also be working with the IDEX startups, or you can be working with one of the services, or you can be working with the DIO team itself. So there are a number of options, and all the details are there on the IDEX website also. Does
Yeah,
it answer
thank you,
you?
sir. Yes, sir. Sir, I have one more question regarding that.
Yeah.
So, as the rising of technology, we are seeing the different type of cyber attacks in different countries. Like currently, I have seen that the cyber attack in Indonesia on their government websites, and many times we see that these type of attacks are happening in our country too. So, for regarding that, as technology is emerging, we need to create a new type of warfare army like cyber army guards, which can prevent our country from this type of attacks. As the technology is growing, so it will be a new era of warfare, like growth of artificial intelligence, which will be effect in different fields. Like its growth will be very useful for our country protection, and also we can use this technology for more better and better for our
Uh,
preservance.
of course, warfare is no longer, the emerging domains, cyberspace, various things, and of course, everybody is very well aware of this. And at the tri services level, also, organizations have been set up, joint organizations to deal with things like what, in fact, specifically the two which, the one which you mentioned, the one which I mentioned also, space as well as cyber. So organizations are there, and they're at the tri services level. Plus, each individual service also has their own, directors which look after this. So yeah, point taken. Warfare is not going to be conventional warfare in the coming years.
Yes, so it is not only unlimited on bullets and
Yeah,
guns, but it is now
yeah.
expanded.
Fully agree.
Okay, thank you, Vineet. Anuj, do you have any question?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Sir, my question is how we can create a framework where the current and the future technologies can go hand in hand, and so that the future requirements of the armed forces can met, and the upcoming technology should be relevant for more time, uh, and I mean it should be relevant for the more time for armed forces. So what needs to be done in terms of creating a framework where all these things can be taken care of?
Okay, again, not only in the Indian Armed Forces, but any armed forces anywhere or any organization for that matter, if you make it more broad, but more so in the case of armed forces, because in armed forces there'll be the element of training, fitting into CONOPS and things of that kind. So the life of the equipment once inducted is fairly long. So you would find that a certain percentage of your equipment is actually obsolete uh, or near obsolescence, which means that you will continue using, say, a particular fighter way past maybe 40 years, 50 years after it was first developed. So that technology which is there on that is fairly old, right? There would be some which is of a more recent vintage, and there would be some which is cutting edge. But this is a cycle. The thing which is cutting edge as of now will slowly move into the other side, because new things are coming. Uh, that is always there in any organization, not only in the armed forces, but more so in the armed forces, because here the times are longer. But having said that, the point which I had made about COTS technology and the time taken for having a mill grade system and the time taken to induct it means you'll always be playing catch up. Let me give you an example here. How often do you change your mobile phone? Every few years, right? And when you get a new phone, it will have new features. But even if you forget about new features in the phone, uh, till a few decades back, there were no smartphones. If you go one more decade behind, there were no mobile phones at all, right? So technology is changing that fast. So if you have, I don't know how to answer this, but the point is, you're saying how do you put into place an organization to manage this? Uh, the organizations are aware and they do realize that it is a mix of technology which will be available to them. Not everything would be cutting edge, because if you put everything which is cutting edge, it is not a mobile phone which you can keep changing. A ship or this thing which is there is inducted is would remain in service for a long time. But yes, with the modernization, refits, and things of that kind, the payload on that is changed. But even after you change the payload, that payload will continue for many years. In the interim, the technology would have, could have, and would have changed. So this is something which is a part of the life cycle management which is there of the product, and how it gels with other things which are there, and with the changes in technology. So that's an ongoing process. I hope
Thank-
that answers your query.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Anuj. Any questions? Meanwhile, so I have a query. So whenever we talk about emerging technology, so the thing that is mostly prominent in our head is drones. So there are a lot of startup and lots of companies that has been building up drones. But the thing is, at the end of the day, the users will be, and it's mostly for the defense purpose rather than the commercial. So there are a lot of companies that has been coming up with drones and allied activities. But what about the trainings? Like, are they, like giving trainings to the users, mostly the armed forces, because they are coming up with this swarm drones and everything, but then, lack of coordination between the users and the machine. So I read an article where there was a mission which was failed because the armies were not able to use the drones properly. So there has been a mass production of drones, but if at the end of the day the users are not equipped, then I think there is a huge gap in it.
Agree. Though when equipment is inducted, training does take place of the users, but the training curriculum is also revised in the training courses to induct. You include things of technology which is being inducted, But specifically, since you mentioned drones, and again, this is not something which is limited to the Indian Armed Forces. We are seeing what's happening in Ukraine. The FPV drones, the way they've become, they've just proliferated. Everybody's using it. But let's not restrict ourselves only to drones. Drones is a very important thing because of the numbers, sheer numbers, and the way they're being used. But every equipment which comes will come with finally it's the man who has to use it, even if it's a unmanned system. This is another thing I must tell you, because if you start saying unmanned system, then people assume that you require no manpower. Some unmanned systems may actually require more manpower and more differently trained manpower. I wouldn't say because the training requirements would be different. One is equipment specific on that particular class, which is what, when we induct the equipment, the OEM does provide the training. But also about as a concept, unmanned systems as a concept and what all it can do. So people need to be trained on that also. I take your point. It's happening. It needs to happen much more.
Thank you so much, sir. I don't think we have any further question, and so
Great. I don't think I have any further answers.
I'm sure you're exhausted, sir. You didn't even get time to catch your breath. Immediately you had to start. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and I'm very sorry, that you had to rush for it. But you've been there yesterday and even today. Thank you so much for all the support.
Thank you very much. And in case anybody has any further questions, any of the students especially, feel free to share my email address with them. If they want, they can write to me or post it to me as a DM or whatever. Any questions anybody's got, I'll be most happy to help them out, or any startup who's getting into this field. Thank you, and I'm logging off now. Good day.
Right, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you to all the participants too, especially